Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this webinar series, the Med Safety Exchange, a joint venture by the Institute for Safe Medication Practices Canada and the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded, so it's available to those who couldn't make it at this time. We have all the lines muted, and we encourage any questions or comments to be typed to us in the chat box or the Q&A box, and then we'll read them out loud at the end of the webinar during the discussion. I'm sure most of you are aware, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, the purpose of this webinar series is to provide another modality and platform whereby healthcare providers can share and learn from one another to minimize the recurrence of med incidents and optimize med safety in all care sites. Every webinar will have roughly the same structure, but with different content. So this webinar will have one med incident analysis regarding the use of phenol and considerations to prevent harm, and a description of a med safety initiative to optimize opioid safety in an acute care setting. This will be followed by the observatory for the update, and then finish up with a discussion period where we read out your comments and allow the speakers to elaborate. Anonymity is a choice for all those involved in the webinar, so I'll only introduce speakers briefly, and they can choose to share as much or as little as they'd like about themselves and their practice site. I'd like to invite the first speaker to discuss an incident analysis involving phenol and its safety considerations to prevent harm.
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Dawn McDonald. I work for Alberta Health Services as a medication safety pharmacist on the Provincial Medication Quality and Safety team within Pharmacy Services. Thanks for asking us to participate in this webinar series. It's a great opportunity to learn from each other. I'm going to share the details surrounding an incident that occurred in one of our smaller rural emergency departments. Some of the finer details about the event remain unknown, but enough information was uncovered to allow us to suggest numerous recommendations for improvements going forward. In this incident, the patient, a 17-year-old female, presented to a rural emergency department to undergo a bilateral toenail wedge resection, also called a matrixectomy or toenail ablation. Following an uneventful procedure utilizing phenol, the physician asked the nurse to place a dressing on the big toes. The nurse proceeded with the dressing, and in the course of doing that, she saw a bowl of clear fluid that she assumed was normal saline, and with that she began to cleanse the betadine off the top of the patient's feet. Shortly thereafter, the patient stated that she was having a burning sensation. Thinking this was quite unusual, the nurse then looked again at the solution in the bowl and realized that it was phenol and not saline as she had assumed. The nurse immediately got some saline and poured it over the patient's feet. She then notified the physician, and PADIS was contacted for further first aid instructions. The patient's feet were rinsed with water in a shower for 15 to 20 minutes as per the instructions. Following, a dressing with glycerin-based ointment was applied. Over the next few days, the patient's condition worsened, unfortunately, and further care was provided by a burn unit at a tertiary care center. As you can see, the patient suffered first-degree burns to her feet. In the day one photo, you can already start to see skin discoloration occurring. Since that time, we have been made aware that the patient's feet have healed. However, there may be long-term effects such as decreased sensation and scarring that may remain. Phenol is a toxic, colorless, crystalline solid with a sweet, tarry odor that resembles a hospital smell. Concentrated phenol liquids, greater than 5%, are very hazardous, being toxic, corrosive, poisonous, and flammable. Phenol was once widely used as an antiseptic. From the early 1900s to the 1970s, it was used as a soap, known as carbolic soap. Concentrated phenol liquids are commonly used for permanent treatment of ingrown toe and fingernails, a procedure known as a chemical matrixectomy. This procedure was first described in 1945, and since that time it has become the chemical of choice for chemical matrixectomies provided by podiatrists. It may also be used for other tissue ablation procedures. It can also be used in some labs as one ingredient in a particular specimen staining procedure, and on occasion, staff in pharmacy may use it to compound when orders are received, and then it should be considered and treated as a high-risk substance. Phenol spray is used medically to help sore throat. It is the active ingredient in some oral analgesics, such as chloroseptic spray and Carmex, which are commonly used to temporarily treat pharyngitis. Serious adverse patient or worker events may happen if this product is handled or used incorrectly, mistaken for something else, or mislabeled. Inadvertent exposures occur most frequently via skin contact and absorption, but inhalation, ingestion, or injection are also possible. Following this incident, the local rural Quality Assurance Committee conducted a quality assurance review using a systems analysis methodology to examine the healthcare system factors and processes that may have contributed to this adverse event. For those in attendance that are not familiar, the objective of a QAR is to understand how the event occurred and identify whether there are recommendations that can be made to address the system issues and hazards identified. Systems analysis methodology does not focus on individual performance or actions. Rather, the goal is to minimize the risk to future patients and families by improving the healthcare system in which we work. The QAR process includes the following steps: reviewing health records and other sources of factual information, interviewing the healthcare providers involved, as well as the patient and family as appropriate, assembling a multidisciplinary team to participate in the investigation of the facts and develop recommendations, as well as reviewing existing policies and procedures and published leading practices that are applicable to that care. While neither I nor my colleagues were directly part of the team conducting the QAR, it's most likely that these are but some topics that would have been considered as part of the review. For example, why was such a large stock bottle of phenol on hand? In this case, it was 500 ml size. Is it necessary for the physician to pour out such a large volume of liquid? What volume of liquid is actually needed? Are there any ready-to-use products available on the market that might be available? And how can we improve decontamination and first aid information available to staff? The main finding in this QAR is highlighted on the slide, and it's related to the general lack of knowledge and awareness around the hazards and use of concentrated liquid phenol. Stemming from this main finding, 2 recommendations were put forward and approved by the Quality Assurance Committee. Recommendation 1 was more provincial and system-wide in nature and pertained to establishing a working group with representation from the following provincial departments: CPSM, Contracting, Procurement and Supply Management, Workplace Health and Safety, Pharmacy Services, Laboratory Services, and Quality Improvement. Once in place, the working group was tasked to develop phenol practice guidelines intended to be used across Alberta Health Services that would address the safe use, how to store and label, advising staff regarding what to do in case of emergency, and clear instructions for first aid for both staff and patients. The working group was also expanded to include someone from PADIS to assist in addressing and updating the first aid information. Recommendation 2 was more local and site-based in nature and pertained to raising awareness regarding the risks around using unlabeled substances, solutions, or medications. While this particular recommendation has a phenol focus specifically, any information, education, or awareness around the practice requirement to label medications would be applicable across the board. Also included in this recommendation would be a review of the information available for WHMIS, or Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, practices including product labels and safety data sheets in general. Under the direction of the CPSM lead, a multidisciplinary group was convened. The group reviewed the QAR recommendations and researched all of the following. They confirmed current information available to staff about phenol, confirmed phenol usage to date and where those products were purchased and stored, as well as attempting to source an alternate product for the use of matrixectomy. The working group also developed some provincial communications. One was an equipment and product advisory, and the other a document outlining phenol decontamination procedures. Equipment and product advisories are provincial standardized AHS documents utilized to alert AHS clinicians to either a medical device, or a medical product safety problem and provide simple, clear instructions to mitigate the risk to patients, staff, physicians, and the organization. This is an image of the liquid phenol E&P advisory that was released in AHS. The first paragraph of every advisory always outlines the issue. In summary, phenol is toxic and a corrosive liquid and can cause severe chemical burns on contact. Phenol is rapidly absorbed by all routes of exposure. Exposure by any route can also cause systemic effects within minutes or hours. There is a potential anesthetic effect, so burns may be painless initially despite deeper burns developing. The next part of every advisory are the actions. The actions are what instruct staff what to do to actually address the issue that's highlighted. The next 3 slides highlight the actions that were outlined for staff. Firstly, staff needs to determine if phenol is stored and or used in their area, and to remove it if deemed unnecessary. Phenol is available in different size bottles, so if still deemed needed, it's recommended to only purchase the smallest size bottle available, for example, 100 ml size. Users were to be ensured to be current in WMIS training and able to access safety data sheets for further information about the safe handling, use, storage, and labeling of phenol. Staff should avoid decanting phenol and never decant it into an unlabeled container. Polyethylene glycol 300 solution, PEG 300, is to be kept with the phenol for decontamination of unintended skin exposure. Staff should follow the emergency decontamination procedures in the event of exposure and seek emergency medical attention. And be aware that immediate referral to the nearest site with a burn center is required if there are any visible or palpable skin changes or evidence of inhalation injury. The Phenol Safety Decontamination Procedures highlights the same similar phenol introduction as the E&P advisory, as well as procedures for responder safety and for skin, eye, and inhalation exposure. This is a close-up of the phenol introduction and background information provided in the document, which we've already covered. And this highlights the suggested decontamination procedures, which I will review further in the next slides. Rapid decontamination is critical for both staff working with the patient and patients exposed to phenol. First responders and hospital personnel must take measures to protect themselves from contact with phenol by donning the appropriate personal protective equipment. Highlighted here are instructions for decontamination when skin exposure has occurred. In summary, the first step is to remove contaminated clothing and to start decontamination with PEG 300 if readily available. Copious amounts are to be used and specific details are outlined for staff to follow. It's important to note that staff should not rub or wipe the exposed area, as this could worsen skin irritation and cause phenol dispersion. This slide highlights the decontamination procedures when PEG solution is not immediately available. However, PEG is the most effective treatment for phenol exposure, so it is important to make all efforts to locate stock when needed. Should there be no PEG available after 30 minutes of water irrigation, there are instructions for staff to wash the exposed area with soap and water as an alternative. As mentioned previously, it's important to get medical attention immediately and to keep in mind that the effects of phenol can be both immediate and delayed. In closing, here are some additional thoughts for consideration that were raised during the review process. Chemicals may not have an expiry date. Their inventory might not be tracked like other medications. Stock might be on a shelf for years and potentially be available in large-sized bottles, which would require decanting, which is not recommended. There appeared to be a general lack of understanding about phenol toxicity overall. Where phenol was actually stocked for use in AHS, it had been procured in a variety of different ways. For example, it wasn't always purchased by or through the site pharmacy department. Early referral to a burn unit was not evident immediately to the staff involved for the reasons already described, and having stock of PEG 300 solution available where phenol continues to be used is critical. AHS patient safety staff continue to be in contact with the patient and her family to let them know of our progress towards addressing the recommendations made as a result of the QAR. Thank you for having me here today to share this story.
Thank you, Dawn, for that detailed action plan following the phenol incident at your site and bringing awareness to the chemical's risk of harm. It's also really helpful to see the information sheets that you've created and distributed amongst your staff to share the learning. I'd like to invite the second speaker to describe the Med Safety Initiative at her acute care site regarding opioid safety with a focus on hydromorphone.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Angela, and I'm going to share with you our experiences with improving patient safety with hydromorphone and other opioids. I am presenting on behalf of the former Saskatoon Health Region, now part of the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I would further clarify that this Stop the Line and the subsequent provincial and the subsequent policies and procedure changes occurred prior to the rollout of the Provincial Health Authority, and this is not a provincial initiative at this time. A bit of background about our organization. We were a large health region offering diverse services, including rural and urban. We had and still do have varying pharmacy resources. At the time of this event, there was no electronic health record, no automated dispensing cabinets, and no 24-hour pharmacy. We utilized paper-based orders, and we had computerized pharmacy order entry. During a 2-month time frame in 2012, we identified a cluster of severe events involving the use of hydromorphone with adult patients requiring interventions which included intubation and admission to the ICU. The usual process in our region for investigating patient safety events included extensive reviews of individual cases. But because of the close proximity of these incidents, we were also able to do an aggregate review of these cases. Now, this led to the identification of a number of contributing factors. 6 contributing factors were identified, and I'll go through them briefly. An urgency for pain control on admission to the ward, unfamiliarity with patient's narcotic history, delay in documentation on the medication administration record, leading to the administration of extra doses, medication administration records not being taken to the bedside for PRN doses also contributed to additional doses being administered. A lack of familiarity with documentation of narcotic administration in the emergency department with multiple places being used created confusion for care providers as they were uncertain of previous dose administration, and reassurances that ordered doses could be given safely. It appeared that inconsistent communication processes, procedural breakdowns, and knowledge gaps were compounded by a sense of urgency. These patients had different clinical presentations, they were from different age groups, and they included both men and women. Transitions in care between clinical areas also played a role. A decision was made to bring this to the Regional Medication Use Quality Committee for a broader discussion. The Regional Medication Use Quality Committee with guest experts met to conduct a structured review, and in addition to the critical incident findings, our voluntarily reported data from the 12-month period prior to these events was reviewed. It indicated that there had been 186 hydromorphone incidents, which made up 7.5% of all our reports. 22% of these were associated with harm. The themes that we identified included wrong quantity. For example, a dose of 3 milligrams might be ordered, but the administration of 6 milligrams occurred. Others included many omitted doses, but it also included one-offs, such as patients taking their medication from home. Hydromorphone and morphine confusion was well represented. Documentation, including the failure to chart a dose that had been administered, leading to additional doses, and failure to transcribe orders was identified. Immediate release and sustained release confusion, and route confusion. An example would be oral doses given intravenously. Concurrently, a pharmacy residency project further informed our review. We considered a number of published recommendations. We looked at the 2012 ISMP hydromorphone survey, and we noticed that our data lined up with those themes, as you can see in this aggregate analysis. Those included the hydromorphone drug name, hydromorphone formulations, and routes of administration. Now, most of you are familiar with the ISMP hydromorphone resource. We incorporated many of those suggestions in our discussions and in our final recommendations, including using the Dilaudid naming convention on order sets, order entry screens, medication administration records and labels, etc., to help differentiate hydromorphone from morphine. Additional findings in the literature were also deliberated, including the use of constraints, storage, redundancies, standardization, differentiation, and monitoring. Now, we already had constraints in place, as we had limited concentration stocked on our units. And in our organization, tall-man lettering was already broadly implemented. We did note sources that recommended developing monitoring parameters, but there was little available in the way of guidelines as to what these would look like in the clinical care setting. Broad stakeholder discussion led to actionable recommendations. In total, we developed 28 recommendations, and I want to review 12, which had the highest impact for us. I'll give you a bit of time to read these, and I have broken this down further in the following slides. Let's review the first 5. We developed and we made available the equipotent dosing chart. And previously, we had multiple route orders, and they were often written as IV and PO in a single order. And now the majority of the time, oral and IV doses now appear as 2 separate orders. In our current printed medication administration record, we've restructured the MAR to include the Dilaudid naming convention. And we've added a note that the IV and the oral dosing are different. The monitoring requirements are also embedded in the printed medication administration record. Our printed MAR was reorganized to co-locate all opioid orders, making it easier for staff to quickly see the administered dose times, both PRN and scheduled. And our independent double checks have become an expectation of care. We also improved our documentation. Previously, there were multiple places to look for drugs that were administered in the emergency department. Now, this is all located on a supplementary MAR. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the previous locations that had been used for recording medication administration, and these are just some of them. Today, all that medication administration is documented in one single location on a supplementary MAR, and that's demonstrated in the image on the left-hand side of your screen. The feedback from our ward unit nurses about this change has been very positive. Annual certification has been ongoing since we implemented these changes, but it does require regular updating. We have defined range dosing, and we've put that into policy, which has provided clarity for across the board for all of our care providers. We do have some standard pain control order sets in use. Now, these improvements required an update to our high alert policy, our medication administration policy, and our ordering of medications policy to reflect the changes. We recognized that a comprehensive electronic health record, automated dispensing cabinets, smaller commercially available doses, amongst others, would have improved safety, but they were not available at the time of this event. And we're in the early stages of developing a provincial computer physician order management, and we will be revisiting some of our outstanding recommendations. This was an intensive effort which was modified and course-corrected over several weeks. For example, we recognized early on that we would miss errors if we didn't include other opioids such as morphine, so we expanded our scope. Our organization was deeply affected by these incidents and had momentum and the tools to try an improvement of this caliber, including Stop the Line, a rapid improvement process. Key to our success was that this was supported at all levels: nursing, pharmacy, physicians, and senior leadership, among others. We had daily updates from our senior leadership team. We had a high degree of physician engagement, and daily unit huddles were used to communicate changes in real time to our nurses at the point of care. So where are we 5 years later? Themes in our voluntarily reported data have indicated an overall total reduction in reports involving Dilaudid and morphine, as well as wrong formulation incidents. And we seem to have had long-term gains with morphine and Dilaudid mix-ups, but recently we've noticed an upswing as demonstrated in this slide. We've had no reported critical incidents involving hydromorphone since implementation. This was a very collaborative effort. Some changes happened quickly, but others definitely took more time. And we came away with a higher level of safety literacy and awareness, specifically with range orders, appropriate dosing, and independent double checks. We did later petition successfully to include the Dilaudid naming convention in the recent Provincial Smart Pump Drug Library. Our challenges have included building monitoring parameters and dosing charts. These require time, expertise, and commitment. And our monitoring remains a struggle in the practical application. We continue to monitor our outcomes, and we know that there is still work to do. We believe we're starting to see organizational drift, and we're in the process of addressing this with a structured re-education plan. We are considering modifications to our medication administration record to include space for capturing the monitoring results. And we're actually hoping to see specific recommended monitoring parameters published in the safety literature at some point in the future. In conclusion, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our care teams who put safety recommendations into practice and thereby create safety for our patients every single day. I would also like to acknowledge the many safety-minded colleagues who assisted in the development of this initiative, as well as those who helped with this presentation. The talented team at NSER for supporting our ongoing voluntarily reported data needs, and the dedicated folks at ISMP Canada for providing an opportunity to share these safety experiences. It often seems that safety is invisible until it's gone, and forums such as this can change it by strengthening the safety literacy of the entire healthcare community.
Thank you, Angela, for describing your initiative, especially now when opioids are still top of mind for safe medication practices. The list of implemented recommendations at your site is particularly helpful, especially for those on the line who may want to try one or more at their own sites. We'll now get into the observatory for some quick med safety updates. First up is an update from CSHP on a new med safety tool.
Thank you, Ambika, for the opportunity to speak today about a new product developed by CSHP and ISMP Canada. My name is Doug Salinger, and I'm currently the Senior Chair of CSHP's Steering Committee for Compounding. An important part of safe medication practice is ensuring that products are safe, effective, and ready for administration. In hospitals and elsewhere, many sterile medications are compounded by healthcare professionals, particularly those in pharmacy. Compounding is complicated, and it needs to be done correctly, always. Not sure where or how to begin to better understand your compounding operations? Do you want to be able to compare your results within your facility, across health authorities, or through the pharmacy chain? CSHP, along with ISMP Canada, developed an online assessment tool that would inform your understanding of how well your compounding operation for sterile products are functioning. The assessment tool for aseptic compounding, also known as ATAC, is intended for use by hospitals, community pharmacies, and other organizations that prepare medications under aseptic conditions, regardless of the size of the compounding operation. ATAC is easy to use. It was constructed using the same platform as the medication safety self-assessment, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. A wide array of topics are covered in ATAC. There are over 250 statements to help you evaluate the compounding operation, each of which is assigned to one of 11 key sections. The statements were carefully chosen and deemed to most significantly influence aseptic compounding practices. Here is a sample portion of ATAC using fictitious data. You'll see that the pharmacy's success is evaluated against each statement individually. Possible responses as you fill in the form will go from there's been no activity to implement this item to this item is fully implemented throughout the facility. For some statements, a not applicable option is available. If your site has more than one controlled work area, you can collectively assess all areas in one ATAC assessment. Alternatively, you could purchase ATAC assessments for each individual site or compounding work area. That's particularly useful if you don't have exactly the same processes in place at all work spots. Immediately after submitting your data, you'll be able to print a report summarizing your results and be able to compare your results to the aggregate responses at the level of each key section. If you want to compare results among sites in your organization, you may purchase ATAC as part of a collaborative between 3 and 12 sites. Doing so, you'll be able to compare results for all sites in that collaborative. Comparisons can be at a high level or at the level of each statement. You can also compare the total aggregate, or you can also compare to the total aggregate or to the demographically similar organizations using the filters provided, which are namely the location, type of organization, and the number of preparations compounded each month. The data you see here, again, is fictitious, but it's sent there for your purposes to view. In order for the comparisons to occur, at least 3 similar facilities have to have submitted results. Confidentiality is assured. Individual results can only be viewed or accessed by the submitting facility. And when you complete more than one assessment, you can compare your results over multiple assessments. ATAC is a tool you can actually go back to and use multiple times. As more data is collected, together we'll get a better picture of compounding practices in Canada. What's working well, and what facets of compounding need more assistance. If you're interested in purchasing ATAC or learning more about compounding, please visit cshp.ca/compounding. Thanks, Ambika.
Great, thank you, Doug, for that safety tool from CSHP. It's actually very timely. Here at ISMP Canada, we have gotten several incidents related to compounding. Just last week, our bulletin was about a compounding error as well. So it's really important to have safe procedures and be able to kind of monitor that and assess that at your site. We'll now have a CPSI update on their med safety initiatives.
Thank you, Ambika. And hello, everyone. My name is Steve Rutledge, and I'm with the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. Today, I'm going to highlight 3 resources of interest for you and your teams. The first is a new guide called Engaging Patients in Patient Safety. The guide is for anyone involved with patient engagement, including patients and families who might be interested in how to partner in their own care to ensure safety, providers interested in creating collaborative care relationships with patients and families, as well as managers and leaders responsible for patient engagement, patient safety, and/or quality improvement. The guide was developed in collaboration with a number of different partners, and included in the guide is a wide range of evidence-based guidance, practical patient engagement practices, consolidated information, resources, and tools, supporting evidence and examples from a number of different notable jurisdictions from across Canada, some personal experiences from patients and families, as well as providers and leaders, and strategies and policies to meet standards and organizational practice requirements that you might be seeing in accreditation standards. The individual sections and the full guide is available on our website. The guide is an evergreen document and is consistently being reviewed and updated as new approaches and strategies are developed. The second resource is a recently released report by Risk Analytica on the case for investing in patient safety. The report updates our previous economic estimates of the magnitude of patient safety in Canada and will be used as an advocacy report to encourage policy change and additional investment in patient safety. The report estimates that over the next 30 years, over 12 million Canadians will be harmed by the healthcare system. 1.2 million Canadians will lose their lives to a patient safety incident within acute and home care settings. Patient safety incidents will cost the healthcare system close to $82 billion, and also states that there could be close to or roughly 400,000 average annual cases of patient safety incidents costing around $7,000 per patient and generating an additional $2.75 billion in healthcare treatment costs per year. As you can see in the graph, patient safety incidents were the third leading cause of death in 2013, and this is primarily due to healthcare-associated infections. Again, this full report is available on our website. Please feel free to use the data, evidence, and information in your own quality improvement and advocacy work. And finally, the third resource I'd like to bring to your attention is the upcoming initiative, the World Health Organization's third Global Patient Safety Challenge on medication without harm. This is a global 5-year campaign that is aiming to propose solutions to address many of the obstacles the world faces today to ensure the safety of medication practices. The three themes of the challenge are high-risk situations, polypharmacy, and transitions of care. WHO's goal is to achieve widespread engagement and commitment of member states and professional bodies around the world in reducing the harm associated with medications. The goal of the challenge is to reduce severe avoidable medication-related harm by 50% globally in the next 5 years, and it was formally launched the second Global Ministerial Patient Safety Summit this past year in Bonn, Germany. The challenge is coordinated by the WHO Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Unit of the Service Delivery and Safety Department in collaboration with the WHO Department of Essential Medicines and Health Products. CPSI, in addition to a number of our close partners in medication safety, will be leading Canada's contribution to the challenge, and we're currently working closely with the WHO to develop a strategy and implementation plan, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, I really encourage you to visit the WHO website to learn more about the challenge and utilize a number of current materials that are available publicly and provided for free of charge for health organizations around the world. Thank you for your time, and back to you, Ambika.
Great, thank you, Steve. 3 very interesting resources there. We are getting close to our discussion time, so I'd like to ask Dr. Mike Hamilton from ISMP Canada to give us a brief look at a med safety article.
Thank you, Ambika. The study, or the article chosen for this month, is a recent article out of the Scandinavian Journal of Caring Sciences entitled Factors Associated with Medication Administration Error and Why Nurses Fail to Report Them. This study looks at medication error occurrences, of course, and reporting, and mainly from a nursing perspective through a series of surveys. It was conducted in Saudi Arabia, but the country, or this organization in particular, does have similar anonymous, non-punitive, strongly encouraged incident reporting processes, very much similar to the Canadian systems, such as CMERPS, NSER, and even our own at ISMP Canada. And there are a number of points in this paper, including looking at some of the factors associated with medication administration errors. But what's really compelling about this story, or this article, is the effort spent on illuminating why medication errors are not reported. And the researchers divided these elements into 4 categories. The first category related to nursing agreement with the definition of a medication error and recognition and importance of an error. And results suggested that really most staff are in agreement with the current definitions, and they can appreciate or recognize an error when it occurs, and there was really broad support for the importance of reporting. The second category looked at reporting effort as a barrier and really revealed, sort of not unexpectedly, that nurses are more likely to report when the time required is short and the process is uncomplicated. The administrative response, or the management response, was the focus of the third category, and the surveys found that there's strong belief amongst respondents that when medication errors occurred, the nursing administration or the nursing management or the infrastructure focused too much on the individual rather than looking at the systems as a potential cause. And survey respondents also submitted that perhaps too much emphasis was placed on medication errors as a measure of the quality of nursing care. The fourth classification was interesting to me, and it was on fear. And I think most telling was endorsement of the fear that nurses could be blamed if something happened to a patient as a result of a medication error, and that there was serious concern that reporting a medication error could have career-related consequences. However, on a positive note, nurses in the study did not believe that other nurses would think they were incompetent if they made a medication error. And I think this is really reassuring that there's mutual understanding between the nurses that, making an error does not equal incompetence. But I think underlying this, it may be unclear if this same understanding extends to the nursing administration. I think this study highlights progress in understanding the definition of errors and understanding the importance of reporting. So that seems to be improving or at a reasonably high level. But there still appears to be, however, a sense of concern amongst care providers about the risk of being blamed for medication safety events, and still a perception that clinical care providers and organizational management may not share the same ideas or values or measurements of safety when it comes to looking after patients.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Very interesting article. So we appreciate all the great information shared today by our speakers, and we'll now turn our attention to the questions we've received throughout the webinar to keep the learning going. So first up, we'll have a question for Dawn.
All right, I'll moderate this part. Dawn, regarding the phenol incident, the first question is, it sounds like phenol is generally thought of as ward stock, and you've provided examples of that. And the question is, should pharmacy have tighter control over it and only dispense it as needed in much smaller amounts?
It's certainly a good question. When we did our research as to where phenol was living, it wasn't always in our pharmacy departments. We've done a lot of work around high-risk compounding and addressing some of the procedures and what products that pertains to within pharmacy. And where we found it, it wasn't actually always available in pharmacy, but at these local sites, emergencies or other outpatient clinics where they actually perform matrixectomies. It's a valid point about taking it back into pharmacy. However, we do have some work underway across the province where we're trying to harmonize where some of these sort of gray products are purchased from and where they should be stored to address and prevent these types of issues in the future. So at this moment, we're not thinking of pulling it back into pharmacy if it's not even at that pharmacy, but certainly when we get a good sense of where phenol is still available for use, we'll be able to have those discussions at those site levels to determine if it needs to be used, where it's going to be stored and housed and stored and labeled.
I'll follow up with a related question, and it's I think it's an interesting question. There are a number of treatment chemicals that have significant harm if used incorrectly in a hospital, like phenol in your example, that don't seem to be under the purview of pharmacy. In your investigation, did you make any other recommendations about these other treatments? And sort of as examples, they put forward contrast dye, chlorhexidine cleaning solutions, tracing dyes like methylene blue, or irrigation fluids, or other sort of solutions we wouldn't necessarily consider part under pharmacy.
It's a very good question, and things like that did come up. This investigation pertained only to phenol. However, there is active consideration regarding other treatment chemicals. One that's come up in particular here in AHS is the use of glacial acetic acid as well, that it's housed outside of pharmacy and can be used and not always considered a medication, although they're used sometimes for medical treatments. And as I mentioned, it's that, pardon me, that harmonization work within pharmacy and other purchasing within AHS, that there will be a review. But for the moment, this team just focused on phenol, but there's lots of applicability across the board with all of these other products that the person was asking about.
And our third question is, what steps have you taken to ensure or to minimize the decanting of phenol, or to make sure you only have as little as you need on hand?
Well, that's a good question that I don't specifically have an answer for. All of these instructions just recently went out at the end of the calendar year around getting sites to actually do the review if phenol is available and if it needs to be still on hand. All of those sites where it is on hand have to report back in as a part of the E&P Advisory Actions, and then a discussion would happen at that site. In terms of decanting, we still are actively looking for a ready-to-use product, which of course would only help for the use in matrixectomies. There is a product, it was called Phenol Easy Swabs, or I think it's renamed now Phenol Swabit. It's available in the U.S. but not currently in Canada, and I know our CPSM was trying to get such a product available here. So in terms of the decanting, we're going to try to get ready to use if possible, limit people to buying the smallest size possible, but I'm not sure we can ever really completely remove that, never decanting. I mean, that's part of the message, but it's hard to know how it's always received at the frontline level.
Quite interesting, Dawn. Thank you very much. We'll turn now to Angela and the work done on opioids, in particular hydromorphone. Our first question is, can you elaborate on your modification or references to dose ranging? What changes did you make in respect to range dosing?
Thanks for the question. That's a great one. Just prior to this initiative, we'd actually been doing some work on defining what a range order was and how they should be interpreted. So we did have some fresh work in play about that, and we put some definitions into both the ordering of medications policy for our nursing teams, as well as into our ordering of medications policy, for our prescribers, as well as our medication administration policy for our nursing teams. Two significant components related to this initiative included the fact that opioid range orders could no longer be greater than 4 times the lowest dose. So an order of 1 to 4 milligrams would be accepted, but if an order for, say, 1 to 10 milligrams was issued, that would not be allowed. The physician or the prescriber would get a call, and then the change would be made. And also, the determination was that there would be only 1 range per order. So there could be a range on the dose or a range on the time, but not both. And the majority of the time, our prescribers choose to attach the range to the dose.
Great. Our second question is just related to the process. You have a number of recommendations, and you mentioned somewhere up in the number 20s or so. How is this received by pharmacists, nurses, doctors, and other staff? And as you implemented these, or as you went through these, is there something you would do differently now?
At the time of this event, we had a highly engaged team in our organization. Everybody wanted to see something different happen with the use of these products. And we were also able to access something called the Stop the Line process, which allowed us to focus intently on this one initiative across the region for, it was probably a 2-week period of time that we worked really hard on this. So we had a lot of engagement. People really were wanting to see us do something differently with this, and that helped us in our success, I think.
And I think related to that is you have a number of facilities under your auspices. So how did you coordinate the project over all these facilities? Did you have local champions? Did some locations implement better than others? And if so, like throughout the number of groups that you have to work with, how do you ensure consistency and uniformity?
Well, in addition to having the ability to utilize the stop-the-line process, we also had and still do have an active and well-developed medication use quality committee, and that's interdisciplinary and it touches all areas of our region, or of our former region. This helps us with buy-in, and through this we were effectively able to communicate all of these changes. We also relied very heavily on our internal network. We couldn't have done this without our dedicated clinical nurse educators, without our managers of nursing, our physician groups, our pharmacists. And we were able to utilize frontline huddles to get the messaging across to everybody every single day. We also utilize nursing orientations, resident orientations, so that we can keep this message fresh as we bring new people into our facilities.
Another question, can you elaborate a bit on what you mean by stop-the-line process?
It's a rapid improvement process. So basically everybody, all hands on deck, focusing on the elements of initiatives such as this for a dedicated period of time. Our question for you is, I applaud you on your initiative to perform an aggregate analysis on the incident events. And did you find you had the necessary buy-in from all your groups and the necessary expertise to carry out this type of analysis? And how did you make sure the findings were valid and reflected what was actually happening? Well, the findings that we saw in our critical incident reviews, we were also able to support that with what we were seeing in the themes in our voluntarily reported data. So we felt quite confident that that this was a reflection of probably more than just those events. It was probably not just isolated. So we were pretty confident going forward that the changes that we recommended would capture more than just those single events. And buy-in was not a difficult thing for us because everybody was acutely aware of these concerns, and across the board, across teams, people were deeply interested in seeing us make some changes for patient safety.
Great, terrific work, Angela.
Thank you.
Next question is for related to the aseptic compounding initiative. And are there any plans to publish the aggregate results after you have sufficient participants?
That really was, it's an interesting question, and it wasn't part of the initial package. The creation of the attack tool was to provide users with that ability to do a self-assessment. Sitting on the steering committee for compounding, I think it would be a great thing to be able to do, and certainly I think CSHP and ISMP Canada will probably look at that once there's aggregate data of looking at what are we doing well, and probably more importantly, what are the challenges and what recommendations could be made to help address some of those challenges. So certainly it's a good question, and I think it's a potential use for aggregate data that hopefully we'll be able to examine more closely in the future.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions coming through, so I think we're going to end early. We do want everyone to be part of the Med Safety Exchange, so whether it's an incident analysis or a Med Safety initiative, please email me to share the learning. And don't forget to fill out the poll that's now available on the bottom right corner. And this is because we are in a pilot run and we want your feedback. We want to know how we can make this webinar most relevant to you and your practice. Registration for next month's webinar on Wednesday, February 14th is now open, so you can head over to the site and register now. Thank you again to our speakers for the important analyses and strategies shared today, and to all our participants for joining the discussion and helping to share the learning. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye for now.